You're sitting around a fire. The sun went down hours ago. Someone passes you a clay bowl. You drink, the world gets softer. The fear gets quieter. The people around you seem closer than they did before. You don't know what fermentation is. You don't know what alcohol does to your brain. Chemistry, you just know that this feeling is the best thing that has ever happened to you. And you want it again tomorrow. For 99% of human history, there were no rehab centers, no 12-step programs, no doctors, no warning labels, just substances as old as humanity itself, and the people who couldn't stop reaching for them. So how did ancient humans handle addiction? The short answer is they invented it first. The long answer changes everything you think. You know about why humans get hooked. Let's start at the very beginning. Your body runs on a reward system that is roughly 500 million years old. When you do something that helps you survive, eat, drink water, bond with other people, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical signal that says, "That was good, do it again." This system kept your ancestors alive for millions of years. It told them to seek food when they were hungry, warmth when they were cold, connection when they were alone. The problem is that certain substances hijack that system completely. They don't just trigger a dopamine response, they flood the brain with more dopamine than any natural behavior ever could. Your brain, which evolved over millions of years to guide you towards survival, suddenly has no idea what hit it, and it wants more. Ancient humans stumbled onto these substances, not by accident, but by being exactly what they were: curious, hungry, and willing to eat almost anything. The oldest evidence of intentional intoxication we have found dates to roughly 9,000 years ago. In China, where pottery residue shows traces of a fermented drink made from rice, honey, and fruit. But fermentation happens naturally. Overripe fruit ferments on the vine. Animals that eat it stagger and stumble. Primatologists studying chimpanzees in West Africa have documented them actively seeking out and consuming fermented palm sap, not occasionally, deliberately, repeatedly. Your ancestors were doing this long before they knew how to make pottery. By the time humans developed agriculture, around 10,000 years ago, fermented drinks were already ancient. Beer in Mesopotamia, wine in Georgia, pulque from agave in Mexico. Every major early civilization on every continent had alcohol, not as a luxury, as a staple, as medicine, as ritual, as the centerpiece of every significant event, from birth to death. But alcohol was not the only thing, not even close. In the caves of the Tassili Noja Plateau in Algeria, rock paintings dating back 7,000 to 9,000 years show mushroom-like shapes covering human figures. Researchers believe these depict psilocybin mushrooms, used in ritual contexts, the oldest mushroom imagery ever found, painted on rock by someone who had been there. Wherever there was in South America, archaeologists discovered ritual snuff kits dating back over 1,000 years, containing traces of multiple psychoactive plant compounds. Carefully crafted kits with tubes and trays, assembled specifically to inhale substances that bent reality. This wasn't casual, this was intentional, repeated and organized. The San people of southern Africa have practiced trance rituals for at least 70,000 years, based on the rock art they left behind. Scholars believe these rituals involved hyperventilation, rhythmic dancing, and plant medicines, all designed to induce altered states that connected the living to the spirit world. 70,000 years, that is not experimentation. That is a tradition so old it predates written language, cities and agriculture combined. In ancient Egypt, opium was cultivated and traded as early as 3,400 years ago. Medical papyri describe it being given to crying children to quiet them, to soldiers to manage pain, to the dying to ease the crossing. The Sumerians called the poppy plant Hul-gil, the joy plant. They knew exactly what it did, and they grew entire fields of it. Coca leaves in the Andes were being chewed. 8,000 years ago, the evidence comes from teeth. Ancient human molars found in burial sites contain traces of cocaine metabolites. Whoever was buried there had been chewing coca regularly, not as a party drug, as an altitude adapter, an appetite suppressant, an energy source that made life at 12,000 feet survivable across every continent, every climate, every culture that archaeology has reached. The same pattern appears. Humans found the substances their environment offered. They consumed them, they built rituals around them, and some of them could not stop. But here is where it gets complicated. Ancient humans didn't draw a clear line between medicine and intoxicant, between ritual and recreation, between healing and escape. Those distinctions are ours, invented recently, imposed backward onto behaviors that existed long before we had words for them. The shaman who consumed psychedelic plants to communicate with ancestors was not an addict. The warrior who drank fermented grain before battle was not self-medicating, and yet the neurological mechanism was identical to what happens in a modern brain, seeking another drink, another hit, another dose. The brain does not care about your intentions. It only knows what you gave it. So what did ancient communities actually do when the mechanism took over? When someone stopped seeking the substance for ritual and started needing it just to feel normal? Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies have found that these groups had almost no concept of addiction as a personal failing. The framework simply didn't exist. What they had instead was a framework of spiritual imbalance. If a person was behaving strangely, consuming compulsively, unable to function in the group, the explanation was not weakness of character. It was that something had entered them, a spirit, a disruption, an outside force that needed to be addressed by the community's healer. This is not as primitive as it sounds. Modern neuroscience increasingly describes addiction in almost identical terms. Not a moral failure, not a choice. A hijacked brain, an outside chemical force that has rewritten the reward system from the inside. The ancient shamans had the metaphor wrong and the mechanism exactly right. Treatment in these societies was communal. The person wasn't isolated or shamed. They were brought closer, rituals were performed. The healer worked to remove whatever had taken hold. The group absorbed the disruption rather than expelling the person causing it. This matters because community is actually one of the most powerful protective factors against addiction that modern research has identified. Numerous researchers have argued that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Ancient humans living in groups of 15 to 50 people, where everyone depended on everyone else, were accidentally practicing the most effective addiction intervention modern science has discovered. But they were not naive about compulsion. Access to powerful substances was almost always controlled by the group. In most early cultures, alcohol and plant medicines were not freely available to everyone. At all times they were dispensed by healers, elders or priests, used in specific contexts at specific times, for specific purposes outside of ritual. Casual consumption was often prohibited, or at least socially sanctioned. This wasn't moral restriction, it was practical management of something the group understood to be powerful, something that could heal in the right context and destroy in the wrong one. Here is what ancient humans understood that we are still struggling to articulate. No substance is the problem, and no substance is innocent. What matters is the container, the ritual, the community, the purpose, the context. Psychedelic plants that guided a shaman through a healing vision were the same compounds that could shatter a person's mind. Without the right guide, the right setting, the right intention holding them in place, the container was everything. And then we dismantled the container. Agriculture brought population growth. Population growth brought cities. Cities brought anonymity, inequality, and surplus. For the first time in human history, you could obtain intoxicating substances without ritual, without community, without purpose, without anyone holding the edges of the experience together. You could just drink alone in the dark until you couldn't stop. By the time ancient Rome was functioning, wine consumption had reached levels modern epidemiologists would classify as a public health crisis. Medical texts from ancient China, 2,000 years old, describe what we now recognize as alcohol use disorder with clinical precision. Egyptian papyri warned against taverns and the men who spend their wages inside them. Sumerian proverbs reference men who drank until they could not find their own homes. The substance was ancient. The problem was the container. breaking and the breaking accelerated. Every century that passed brought more isolation, more surplus and more potent compounds. Distillation made alcohol stronger. Trade routes spread opium across continents. Industrial chemistry eventually produced substances so precisely engineered to trigger the reward system that the ancient brain running underneath has no defense at all, and that brain is still yours. Sitting in your skull right now is the same reward system that made your ancestor reach for a bowl of fermented grain around a fire 10,000 years ago. It cannot tell the difference between that and the substance engineered in a modern laboratory to produce the maximum possible dopamine response with the minimum possible effort. It only knows one thing that felt good. Where is more every craving you have ever felt for something you knew wasn't helping you? Is that system doing exactly what it was built to do? Finding what feels good, remembering where it is, pulling you back. Your ancestors sat around fires and past things that made the dark less frightening, the cold less sharp, and the people beside them feel like home. They didn't need to understand neuroscience to understand that this feeling was worth seeking, and some of them sought it past the point where they could stop. And when that happened, the group didn't look away, didn't label them broken, didn't lock them somewhere alone until they fixed themselves. They pulled them closer, because in a group of 20 people, where every single person's survival depends on every other person, you cannot afford to lose someone to the darkness inside their own head. We have the clinical models now, the research, the pharmacology, the treatment protocols. What we keep losing and keep trying to rebuild is the thing ancient humans had without trying the fire. The circle, the people who stay,